Honestly, what is she even doing here? This is a forward element, not a field hospital 10 clicks behind the wire. We need shooters, not glorified nurses. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, sliced through the tense air of the briefing tent. Captain Davis, a man whose confidence was as polished as his boots, but whose experience was considerably duller, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the woman standing quietly by the stacked Pelican cases. The handful of soldiers in his orbit chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between their captain's arrogant smirk and the subject of his scorn. She didn't move. Sergeant Eva Rostova, a medic attached to the unit for this specific push, remained a statue of calm. Her gaze was fixed on the tactical map, her expression unreadable. She was of average height, with a build that was lean and economical, giving no hint of the disciplined strength coiled within. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was a study in placid neutrality. She offered no retort, no flinch of indignation, no tightening of the jaw. Her silence was a void that seemed to swallow Davis's insults without a trace. It was a professional silence, a practiced stillness that unnerved some and was misinterpreted by others as weakness or fear. Davis, belonging firmly to the latter group, took it as an invitation to continue. Look at her. Probably can't even field strip her own sidearm, let alone run a patrol rifle. We're going out to confirm a high-value target for an airstrike, and they send us support staff. It's a joke, but as the captain preened, a different kind of authority, Colonel Miller, stood at the edge of the tent, his eyes narrowed not at the map, but at the woman. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her hands. He watched the way she almost unconsciously checked the seals on her aid bag, her fingers moving with a fluid, ingrained precision. He saw the way her stance was perfectly balanced, her weight distributed like a seasoned hunter's, ready to move in any direction with explosive efficiency. A ghost of a memory flickered in the old colonel's mind, a phantom echo of another time, another place, another operator with that same impossible stillness. He saw the subtle way she scanned the ridgeline on the map, her eyes tracking terrain not as a medic looking for casualty collection points, but as something else entirely, something far more dangerous. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence below. The tension in the tent thickened, a palpable miasma of dust, sweat, and unvoiced resentment. Captain Davis, basking in the brief glow of his perceived dominance, continued his tirade, his voice a grating instrument of ego. The objective is on the Ashar Ridge. It's an exposed position, and we're tasked with positive identification of the target, a regional commander for the insurgency. We paint him, air support does the rest. It's a recon mission, ladies and gentlemen, which means speed, stealth, and lethality. Every single person on this detail needs to be an asset that can pull their own weight, and then some. He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping over his team before landing, once again on Sergeant Rostova. Which is why I have a problem with carrying dead weight. Every rifle we leave behind to make room for extra medical supplies is a liability. He made a show of looking at her aid bag, a large, meticulously organized pack that seemed to offend his tactical sensibilities. Rostova, for her part, continued her silent preparations. She was now checking the contents of a smaller trauma kit, her fingers dancing over pressure dressings, tourniquets, and chest seals. The movements were not just practiced, they were a form of meditation. Each item was placed with an economy of motion that bordered on artistry. It was the same deep, cellular discipline one might see in a master watchmaker or a bomb disposal technician. Her focus was absolute, a bubble of profound calm in the center of Davis's storm of arrogance. She heard his words, of course. They registered as ambient noise, as tactically irrelevant data, like the distant hum of the generators or the crunch of gravel outside. They did not touch her. Her mission was clear: keep the members of this team alive. The opinions of a temporary commander were not part of that equation. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. They were younger, less seasoned than the quiet medic, but they knew the captain was crossing a line. Disrespect was a corrosive agent in a small unit. Yet, he was their commander, and she was an outsider, an attachment. So they remained silent, their complicity hanging in the air. Colonel Miller, still observing from the periphery, saw it all. He saw Davis's preening, the team's discomfort, and most importantly, Rostova's unshakable composure. He noted the way she had her sidearm holstered, not in a standard-issue drop leg that flopped around, but in a custom-fit, high-ride Kydex holster that kept the weapon tight to her body, ensuring a clean, fast draw. It was a small detail, the kind of lifer an old war dog would notice. It was a choice made by someone who had likely drawn that weapon under duress more times than Captain Davis had been on actual patrols. The colonel's frown deepened. He knew that assumptions were the currency of fools, and Davis was spending it lavishly. He decided to let the situation play out. The desert had a way of stripping away pretenses and revealing the truth of a person. The Ashar Ridge would be the crucible. The convoy of 3 armored vehicles churned a plume of fine, khaki-colored dust as it snaked through the valley. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight that shimmered above the metal hulls. Inside the lead vehicle, Captain Davis was in his element, barking coordinates into the radio, a man playing the part of a great commander. In the second vehicle, Colonel Miller sat beside the driver, his gaze distant, scanning the high ground. In the third, Sergeant Rostova rode in the back, her aid bag resting on the seat beside her like a trusted companion. She wasn't looking at the scenery. Her eyes were closed. She was regulating her breathing, maintaining the state of calm readiness she had cultivated over a decade of operating in the world's most unforgiving places. She was a coiled spring, outwardly inert, but holding an immense store of potential energy. The quiet hum of the engine, the rattle of equipment, the static of the comms, it was all a symphony of normalcy, a prelude she knew all too well. Then, the world tore itself apart. The explosion was a deafening, visceral concussion that lifted their vehicle and slammed it back down onto the road. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burnt explosives and diesel. An IED. The ambush was sprung with perfect, brutal timing. RPGs streaked down from the high ground, impacting the lead vehicle, which erupted in a ball of fire. Simultaneously, heavy machine gun fire opened up from a concealed position on the ridge, a hornet's nest of tracers stitching across the kill zone. Panic erupted. Young soldiers, their training warring with primal fear, fumbled for their rifles. The comms were a cacophony of shouting. Contact right. Contact right. 2 o'clock high. But Rostova was already moving. Even as the vehicle settled, she had her door open, her body low. She didn't reach for her own rifle. Her first priority was her duty. A call came over the radio, choked with panic. Colonel's hit. Man down in Vehicle 2. Rostova didn't hesitate. She moved through the storm of incoming fire with a low, fluid grace that defied the chaos around her. Bullets snapped past her head, kicking up puffs of dirt at her feet, but her path was direct and unwavering. She reached the second vehicle, wrenched open the rear door, and slid inside. Colonel Miller was slumped against the bulkhead, his face pale, a dark stain spreading rapidly across his chest. His men were frozen, providing ineffective suppressive fire out the windows. Get him on the floor. Now. Rostova's voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the noise with the absolute authority of life-or-death competence. The soldiers, startled, obeyed instantly. They eased the colonel down. Rostova was on him in a second, her shears slicing through his body armor and uniform. A sucking chest wound. Her hands were a blur of motion. She slapped on a vented chest seal, her movements sure and swift. She checked his vitals, her fingers finding his carotid artery. The pulse was thready. She started in 4, her hand impossibly steady as she found a vein on the first try, even as the vehicle shuddered from a nearby RPG impact. She worked in a bubble of pure, focused action. The world outside, the gunfire, the explosions, the shouting was just background noise. There was only the patient, the injury, and the procedure. The firefight raged, a maelstrom of sound and fury. The soldiers of the small convoy were pinned down, their return fire sporadic and panicked. The enemy, well entrenched and commanding the high ground, had them in a perfectly constructed kill box. Colonel Miller, stabilized but still in critical condition, grunted, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at Rostova, who was now applying a pressure dressing. "The target," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The ridge. They're protecting him." Rostova just nodded, her focus entirely on her patient. She finished securing the dressing, checked the 4-drip, and then looked at the 2 soldiers cowering in the vehicle with her. "Lay down suppressive fire. Sector 4. Short, controlled bursts. Keep their heads down," she commanded. Her tone left no room for argument. They complied, their fear momentarily replaced by the certainty in her voice. But it wasn't enough. The enemy fire was too accurate, too heavy. The high-value target, the reason for the entire mission, was up on that ridge, protected by this overwhelming force. The airstrike couldn't be called in without positive identification. The mission was a failure. The team was facing annihilation. Miller, drifting in and out of consciousness, gestured weakly with his hand toward the corner of the vehicle. Lying there was his rifle. It wasn't a standard issue M4. It was a thing of beauty and lethality, a highly customized M210 enhanced sniper rifle, the semi-automatic evolution of the M21. It was topped with a state-of-the-art optic, and its stock was worn smooth in the places where his hand and cheek had rested for thousands of hours. It was a master's tool. The target, Miller breathed again. He's in the cave mouth, northeast face of the ridge, the one with the single dead tree. Rostova looked from the colonel's pale face to the rifle. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the weight of the mission he could no longer complete. A decision was made. In that instant, the medic vanished. Something else, something older and far more lethal, took her place. She moved to the rifle. She didn't just pick it up, she gathered it, her hands knowing its weight and balance instinctively. She ejected the magazine, checked the round in the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, and then smoothly reinserted the mag with a firm, audible click. She settled into a firing position at the rear of the vehicle, using a mangled piece of the doorframe as a rest. Her body became a platform of solid bone and muscle. The chaos outside seemed to slow down, to warp around her. She brought the optic to her eye, and the world snapped into sharp, magnified focus. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate dropped. In, out, in, out. She found the northeast face of the ridge. She found the dead tree. And there, just inside the shadow of a cave mouth, she found him. A man surrounded by guards, holding a radio, directing the ambush. The high-value target. He was over 800 meters away. A crosswind was kicking up dust from left to right. It was a shot that a highly skilled sniper would find challenging on a good day on a flat range. From a compromised position, in the middle of a complex ambush, it was next to impossible. But for Rostova, it was just a math problem. Windage, elevation, spin, drift, Coriolis effect. The numbers spooled through her mind, an intuitive, lightning-fast calculation. She let out half a breath and held it. Her finger rested on the trigger. The world narrowed to the man in her crosshairs. A gentle squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a familiar and comforting push. The sound of the shot was swallowed by the din of the battle, a single, sharp crack lost in the chorus of automatic fire. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, 800 meters away, the man in the cave mouth collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut. The radio fell from his hand, skittering across the rock. A moment of stunned confusion rippled through the enemy fighters. Their linchpin was gone. Their fire faltered. The torrent became a trickle, and then silence. A profound, deafening silence, broken only by the ringing in the ears and the distant crackle of the burning vehicle. The soldiers stared out at the ridge, then back at the woman holding the colonel's rifle. Her expression was the same as it had been in the briefing tent. Calm, neutral, unreadable. She ejected the spent casing, cleared the weapon, and laid it gently back where she had found it. The medic had returned. The journey back to the forward operating base was a study in stunned silence. The surviving soldiers, their adrenaline giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion and a profound sense of awe, kept stealing glances at Sergeant Rostova. She sat quietly in the back of the vehicle, monitoring Colonel Miller's vitals, her face illuminated by the soft green glow of the portable monitor. She was once again the medic, her movements economical and precise as she adjusted the fore drip and checked the colonel's dressings. It was as if the events of the last hour, the impossible shot, the sudden decisive end to the ambush, had happened to someone else entirely. There was no trace of triumph on her face, no hint of the lethal professional who had emerged from the chrysalis of the quiet medic. There was only a calm, focused competence. Captain Davis sat in the front, his hands gripping the dashboard so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't said a word since the gunfire had stopped. His world, once so clearly defined by rank, regulations, and his own perceived superiority, had been shattered into a million pieces. The woman he had derided as dead weight, the glorified nurse he had publicly humiliated, had not only saved the life of his commanding officer under intense fire, but had then single-handedly accomplished a mission that his entire team had failed to execute. She had taken a master sniper's rifle and made a shot that he knew, with a certainty that churned in his gut, was the stuff of legend. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, hollow feeling of abject humiliation. He felt like a child who had been boasting about his skill with crayons in the presence of Rembrandt. Upon their arrival at the FOB, the base medical team swarmed the vehicle, carefully extracting the wounded colonel. As they wheeled him towards the surgical tent, Miller, still weak but lucid, lifted a hand. "Wait," he rasped. His eyes scanned the small crowd of onlookers until they found Rostova, who was handing off her patient notes to the lead surgeon. "Sergeant," he called out, his voice stronger now. Rostova turned. "Yes, sir." Her reply was quiet, respectful. Miller beckoned her closer. He then turned to his executive officer, who had rushed to meet them. "Major, give me Sergeant Rostova's file. Her full file. Unredacted. Bring it to my CP on the terminal." Now the major, confused but recognizing the steel in the colonel's voice, hurried off. The crowd, including a pale and shaken Captain Davis, watched as Rostova followed the colonel's gurney towards the command post, her expression as placid and unrevealing as ever. The mystery of the quiet medic was about to be solved, and a sense of profound anticipation settled over the entire base. Inside the climate-controlled quiet of the command post, Colonel Miller sat propped up on a cot, refusing further medical treatment until he had settled this. The base commander and a few other senior officers stood by, their curiosity piqued by the unusual summons. Captain Davis was there too, ordered by Miller to attend. He stood rigidly in the corner, his face a mask of dread. The major returned and approached a hardened tactical terminal. After a few keystrokes and a biometric scan authorized by the colonel, a file bloomed on the screen. The header read, Rostova, EVA. Sergeant, U.S. Army. Miller gestured to the major. "Read it. Read the summary aloud." The major cleared his throat and began to read, his voice growing more incredulous with each line. Subject, Rostova, Eva. Current assignment, Special Operations Combat Medic Course Instructor, attached to 3rd Battalion for Field Evaluation of New Trauma Protocols. He paused, glancing at Rostova, who stood at parade rest near the door. Previous assignments, redacted. Unit classification, Tier 1. Primary MOS, 18D, Special Forces Medical Sergeant. Secondary MOS, 18B, Special Forces Weapons Sergeant. Sodik qualified. The major stopped, his eyes wide. Sodik, the Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. The most advanced and demanding sniper school in the entire U.S. military. He continued, his voice now hushed. Combat deployments, 12. Operational theaters, redacted. Confirmed engagements. He trailed off, staring at the number on the screen, unable to say it aloud. Call sign. Ghost, known for expertise in high-angle, long-range engagements in non-permissive environments. He looked up from the screen, his gaze landing on Davis. Awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during Operation Nightfall. Awarded the Silver Star twice. A heavy silence filled the room. The litany of honors and classified operations painted a picture not of a simple medic, but of a living legend, a quiet professional who had walked in the highest echelons of the special operations world for over a decade. She was not just a shooter. She was one of the best shooters the Army had ever produced. She was a ghost, a myth made real. Colonel Miller's gaze was fixed on Captain Davis, whose face had drained of all color. The captain's smug certainty had been systematically dismantled and replaced by a crushing, undeniable truth. The woman he had mocked was, in every meaningful metric, his superior. Her quietness wasn't weakness. It was the supreme confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Miller then did something that sent a shock wave through the room. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself off the cot and stood, swaying slightly. He faced Sergeant Rostova, who remained perfectly still. Slowly, deliberately, the old colonel brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. It was not the casual salute a senior officer gives a subordinate. It was a gesture of profound, unequivocal respect, an acknowledgement from one warrior to another. Sergeant Rostova, Miller said, his voice ringing with authority. On behalf of the United States Army, thank you for your service. Your actions today saved my life and the lives of my men. You are a credit to your unit and to the uniform. He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. After a moment, Rostova returned it, her own movement crisp and precise. Just doing my job, sir. The two words hung in the air, a testament to a creed of silent competence that Davis was only now beginning to comprehend. The lesson had been delivered. The story of a medic who was secretly a legendary sniper spread through the FOB like a desert wind. It started with the officers who had been in the command post, their voices hushed with awe. It was picked up by the comms technicians who had heard the stunned silence after the single shot, and by the soldiers from the convoy who described the event with wide, disbelieving eyes. Within hours, everyone from the lowest private sorting mail to the base commander knew. They called her the ghost of Ashar Ridge, the name stuck. Analysts in the intelligence hub pulled up the satellite and drone feeds from the ambush. They triangulated the shot. The distance was confirmed, 817 meters. They factored in the wind, the angle of the shot from a moving, unstable platform, and the psychological pressure of the moment. The data painted a clear picture. The shot was 1 in a million, a feat of marksmanship that belonged in a textbook. A grainy photo of Rostova, captured from a drone feed as she moved to treat the colonel under fire, was printed out and pinned to the main bulletin board in the operations center. Underneath it, someone had simply written, "Competence is a quiet professional." She became a symbol, a living embodiment of the idea that true worth isn't measured in volume, but in action. Rostova, for her part, seemed completely oblivious to the legend growing around her. She deflected every attempt at praise with a simple nod or a quiet, "We were a team." She spent her time in the medical tent, mentoring the younger medics, showing them more efficient ways to pack a trauma kit, demonstrating advanced techniques with the same quiet patience she applied to everything. She treated them not as subordinates, but as fellow professionals, sharing her knowledge freely and without ego. The most profound change, however, occurred in Captain Davis. The event had not just humbled him. It had fundamentally broken and reshaped his understanding of leadership and respect. He avoided Rostova for 2 days, wrestling with his shame. Finally, he sought her out. He found her in a quiet corner of the base, meticulously cleaning Colonel Miller's M210 rifle before returning it to him. She was running a cleaning rod down the barrel, her movements methodical and reverent. Davis stood there for a long moment before speaking, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Sergeant." Rostova looked up, her hands never ceasing their work. "Captain," she acknowledged. Davis took a breath. I came to apologize. What I said in the briefing tent, there's no excuse for it. It was arrogant, unprofessional, and ignorant. I judged you based on nothing, and I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. You are the most professional soldier I have ever met. And I am sorry." The apology was stark, stripped of any justification. It was the sound of a man who had been forced to look at his own deep-seated prejudices and found them wanting. Rostova paused her work. She looked at Davis, her gaze not cold or angry, but simply analytical. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the painful honesty of his admission. She had seen men like him before, men whose confidence was a shield for their insecurities. Some of them learned, some of them didn't. Davis, it seemed, was one of the former. She finished wiping down the bolt carrier group of the rifle, the oiled metal gleaming under the harsh sun. She didn't offer words of forgiveness or absolution. That wasn't her way. Instead, she offered something more valuable, a lesson. Assumptions are a liability in the field, sir, she said, her voice even and low. They get people killed. You assess the threat, you assess your assets, and you make a decision based on data, not on how you feel. That's the job. She slid the bolt back into the rifle with a satisfying metallic snick. Your men look to you for that clarity. Your certainty has to be built on facts, not on ego. It was more than she had said to him, or anyone, since her arrival. It was a concise, brutally efficient masterclass in leadership, delivered in under 50 words. She then held out the rifle to him. The colonel will want this back. Make sure it's logged in correctly. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was profound. It was a quiet act of restoring a small piece of his duty, of treating him not as the fool he had been, but as the officer he was supposed to be. Davis took the rifle, the weight of it feeling heavier than before. It felt like a legacy, a responsibility. Understood, Sergeant, he said, the words catching in his throat. He nodded, a gesture of deep, newfound respect, and walked away. The story of Captain Davis's apology also made the rounds, adding another layer to the legend. It became a tale not just of Rostova's skill, but of the transformative power of demonstrated competence. It showed that respect wasn't something you could demand. It was something you earned, often in silence. The ripple effects continued. The younger soldiers from the convoy now walked with a different kind of confidence. They had seen what true professionalism looked like under fire, and it had recalibrated their own aspirations. They stopped trying to emulate the loud bravado of men like the old Davis and started paying more attention to the quiet ones, the ones who focused on their gear, who knew their jobs inside and out, who didn't need to boast. The culture of the unit began to shift, slowly but surely, away from superficial arrogance and toward a deeper appreciation for quiet, demonstrable skill. The photo on the bulletin board stayed up, a permanent fixture. And the spot on the high ground, the place where the impossible shot had landed, was officially marked on all subsequent tactical maps of the region. It was no longer just a grid coordinate. It was now labeled Rostova's Perch. Months later, a new rotation of soldiers arrived at the FOB. They were young, full of swagger, fresh from training, and eager to prove themselves. On their first day, they were gathered for an orientation brief by their platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran. He walked them over to the main operations map, a massive, wall-sized display of the surrounding area of operations. He didn't point to the known enemy strongholds or the safe routes. He pointed to a small annotation on a distant ridgeline. "See that?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. "That's called Rostova's Perch. Let me tell you a story." He recounted the tale of the ambush, of the pinned-down convoy, of the wounded colonel. He told them about the quiet medic who everyone had underestimated. He described the impossible shot, the sudden silence, and the reveal of who she truly was. He told them the story not as a feat of arms, but as a lesson in humility. Out here, the sergeant concluded, his gaze sweeping over the new faces, you will meet people who don't look the part. They won't be the loudest in the room. They won't brag about their qualifications. They will simply do their job with a level of excellence you can't possibly comprehend. Your job is not to judge them. Your job is to shut your mouth, open your eyes, and learn from them. Because in this line of work, competence doesn't wear a sign. It proves itself in silence. The story had become folklore, a foundational myth for the unit, passed down from one rotation to the next. It was a constant reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice least. Captain Davis, now promoted to major, was a different man. He was known for his quiet, observant leadership style. He mentored his junior officers relentlessly, not on tactics, but on character. His favorite teaching point was a simple one. Look at their hands. Look at their gear. Look at how they carry themselves when they think no one is watching. That's where you find the truth of a soldier. He had learned the lesson of Sergeant Rostova in the most painful way possible, but he had learned it well. He carried it with him, a permanent part of his leadership DNA. The true legacy of that day wasn't a medal or a plaque. It was in the quiet professionalism she had modeled, a standard that now permeated the unit's culture. It was in the humility she had taught a young captain, a lesson he would pass on for the rest of his career. It was in the simple, powerful idea that your value is not determined by the noise you make, but by the precision of your actions. The legacy of a single act of quiet competence can echo longer and louder than any boast. It doesn't reside in the memory of the action itself, but in the standards it sets for all who come after. The story of Eva Rostova became more than just a war story. It transformed into a parable. It was a living document on the nature of respect, a testament to the fact that true authority is not granted by rank, but is demonstrated through irrefutable skill. Her silence in the face of mockery was not passivity. It was the calm of a professional who knew the truth would eventually present itself through the unassailable logic of action. Her choice to save a life first and then to end a threat second was not a contradiction, but the perfect expression of her dual roles as a healer and a warrior, a guardian in the truest sense of the word. The rifle she used, a tool of the master, became a symbol of a legacy passed on, a responsibility accepted and flawlessly executed. It represented the idea that the tools of war are only as good as the character of the person who wields them. The name on the map, Rostova's Perch, served as a permanent landmark, a geographical reminder that assumptions are treacherous terrain and that the high ground belongs to those with the skill and discipline to take it, regardless of the uniform they wear or the title they hold. This is the enduring power of the quiet professional. They do not seek the spotlight because the mission is their focus. They do not demand respect because their actions command it. They build their legacy not with words, but with deeds, creating a standard of excellence that inspires others to be better, to be quieter, to be more competent. They remind us that the world is changed not by the loudest voice in the room, but by the steadiest hand. The ripples of her actions that day continue to spread, fostering a culture where listening became more valued than speaking, and observing became more critical than directing. Newcomers learned to measure their peers not by their boasts, but by their readiness, their discipline, and the quiet confidence that comes only from genuine mastery. The ultimate vindication was not the stunned look on a captain's face or the salute from a colonel. It was the enduring, positive change that grew from the seed of her silent example. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.